Aloha and welcome to our video on prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. The goals for the video are to describe the features of prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells, and then we're going to review the 4 levels of organization in complex organisms. So let's begin today with a discussion on prokaryotic cells. Our prokaryotic cells are identified by the fact that they only have an external membrane. So they only have one membrane that separates them from the outside world. The most common example of our prokaryotic cells are going to be the bacteria. Now the bacteria are going to be named from their shape. We have the cocci, which are going to be circular. We have the bacilla, which are going to be kind of rod-shaped, and a really good example is the one down here. And then we have spirilla, which are going to be kind of spiral-shaped. And this is how we classify the bacteria. Now, as I mentioned, they have one cell membrane that separates them from the world. They can have some other things with them. Their DNA is just kind of lying around inside of it. They do have ribosomes, so they are able to manufacture proteins. They'll have these little pili coming off the side, little like hair looking like things, and then sometimes they'll have a single and solitary flagellum, and that's for locomotion. Now, one of the interesting things about prokaryotic cells is the way they reproduce. They do that through binary fission, and through that, what happens is the DNA inside the cell will duplicate. So now they have 2 sets of DNA. One side goes to one side of the cell, the other side will go to the other side of the cell. It'll split right here down through the middle, and it creates 2 daughter cells that are exactly the same. So it's kind of just copying that cell and making 2 copies out of it. Okay, so now let's talk about eukaryotic cells. Eukaryotic cells differentiate themselves from the prokaryotic cells in the sense that they have multiple membranes. So they all still have this external membrane here, which separates them from the outside world. But inside, we start to notice that there are structures, and these structures here are membrane-bound areas of the cell, which allow them to have a specialized area of function. Perhaps the easiest way to determine you have a eukaryotic cell is if you look at it under a microscope, you'll see this big structure here in the middle. That's going to be the nucleus, and we'll talk more about that a little bit later on in the unit. Okay, so let's review really quickly. We have our prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells, and we looked at that makes them the same. Our eukaryotic cell is going to have a nucleus, and it does have these membranes which surround these internal structures called organelles. Humans are eukaryotic organisms, and here's the organelles right down here. Now, in contrast, we learned about the prokaryotic cells. The prokaryotic cells are the bacteria. Notice they don't have a nucleus, they don't have internal membranes, they don't have organelles, but they do reproduce by binary fission, which means they just simply make a copy of themselves. So that's the difference between the two. Prokaryotic only has one membrane. The eukaryotic cells can have many membranes. Okay, and if you can recall back when we were talking about how things are put together, we talked about atoms forming molecules, forming macromolecules, forming organelles, forming into these cells. And we have an example of one here. This is what a muscle cell would look like. We have 4 basic levels of organization. When we're talking about organisms, we take it down to the cells. All of them are going to be made of those cells. If I get a bunch of cells working together, I come up with a tissue, okay? And then if I put a bunch of tissues working together, we get an organ, like here in the stomach. And then finally, those organ systems are going to come together, like the digestive system, and ultimately we end up with our organism here as a whole. Okay, so that's how we organize things. You'll see how we're going to talk about those a little bit later on in the course. As you know, the lessons will go over what we covered here today in a lot more detail. Good luck with the lessons, and we'll see you in the next video.